It certainly is important to know about hardware. But you know what? Hardware really isn't all that exciting once you've kind of taken a look at the pieces. They're just little bits of plastic and circuitry and metal that all go together, but they don't do much. Well, in this chapter, we're ready to get started. There's nothing quite like getting logged onto the computer and getting to work, and that's what we'll do. We're going to use the Windows interface in this case to explore how we log onto the computer, what the pieces are, how you navigate around, and we'll even let you customize some things, kind of like when you start to add things to your new house. That way it'll make it your own. When you're finished, you'll be very familiar with what the operating system is, how it interacts with hardware, and how it interacts with you. Even though all of the technicalities about how hardware works can be very difficult, the concept of hardware itself is not difficult because we can actually pick up or touch a mouse, a keyboard, a monitor, and even the CPU or the box. What's a little bit harder to understand is this thing called an operating system, because it really is one of those intangibles. We don't know why we need it or what exactly it's doing for us. So in order to explain this, I'd like to use an analogy. And I'm going to start off with a question, which is, what if you traveled? We know that you speak a language, maybe even more than one. And for our purposes, we're going to say that your primary language is English. But what if you traveled to a different country and you ran into a rural farmer in another country and they speak only his or her language? Maybe they've never been outside of their own town. They don't speak English and they don't speak any of the languages that you happen to speak. So if you traveled to their country and you ran into this person, you don't speak each other's language, how might you communicate? Well, now in a regular class, I love this because we often get into engaging discussions about the fact that you can use body language and gestures and things like that. But the point is, here we're trying to say that you don't speak the same language, and that makes it very difficult. But you could use a translator, and that's what people often do when they travel. Somebody who speaks both your language and the language of somebody else. That would be helpful. When we talk about computer systems, the language that computers speak is called binary. Hardware speaks this language. And the interesting thing is that everything in binary is simply a combination of zeros and ones. Now, I haven't checked recently, but I'm almost positive that you don't speak binary. So then we come into an issue. When the computer wants to see ABC, in binary it sees this combination of zeros and ones representing each letter. I don't speak binary either. As a matter of fact, there aren't very many people in the world who do, but it's a very complicated language. Actually, I shouldn't say that. It's a very simple language. It's just not one that people speak or understand. So if you don't want to learn binary, how do you think you're going to communicate with your computer? Well, fortunately, that's exactly what the operating system does for us. The operating system is the translator. It translates keystrokes, mouse clicks, and sometimes even those voice commands that we've talked about into binary code that the hardware can understand. So if I double-click on something, the operating system says, aha, she double-clicked on a file, that means she wants to open the file, and it translates that into a binary command that the hardware can understand. Isn't that cool? That's what the operating system really does. The operating system can also be commonly referred to as the OS for short. We'll use that because it's a little bit simpler than saying operating system every time. So now we know that the operating system is the translator between the user and the hardware, your input and whatever the computer needs to do. In pure theory, the operating system doesn't really do anything useful. We know that it doesn't send emails and it doesn't do calculations, but it actually does some very useful things, just not typically what users think of. The operating system, though, usually does include a few simple or basic applications. For example, the Windows operating system has always included very simple word processors like Notepad and WordPad. The document that we've used in some prior lessons actually used WordPad, which comes loaded with the Windows operating system. Windows also includes a calculator so that you can do simple mathematical calculations. So they actually aren't part of what we typically consider the normal operating system. They're actually separate applications, but they do come bundled together with the operating system. So, as a consumer, we can just say that when we get an operating system like Windows, it does include some very basic applications that let us do some very simple things with just the operating system without having to buy any other programs or software. Remember, though, that the important thing that it really does is not the calculator or the word processor. It's enabling the hardware components to communicate with each other as well as with the applications and with the users themselves. Some of the things that it does includes managing files and the file system itself. Types of operating systems include Windows, which we're talking about primarily here. Linux, or Linux as it sometimes is pronounced, is also an operating system that works on PCs, and Unix is a system often used in things like government or larger corporations. The Mac also has an operating system. There are some others that are out there as well, but these are kind of the main players at the moment. We're not here to argue or discuss which one is better, which one is best, and which one you should be using. Just know that all of these are operating systems that act as a translator between the user, the hardware, and the software. Operating systems then come in versions and editions. The later versions have updated or new functionality, security, and services. And different editions of the same version often target things and have enhancements that are specified for a particular audience. I've included as examples here some of the Windows 7 operating systems. Now, the vendor is Microsoft, the operating system is Windows, the version is 7, and the editions we can see here include Home Premium, Professional, and Ultimate. The main difference between them is that Home Premium is optimized for home users, so it focuses a lot on multimedia like audio and video. Professional is more business-oriented, so it has some extra things as far as security goes and file encryption. Ultimate really is a combination of the other two. Ultimate has all of the features in it for both personal use as well as business use. You should choose the edition that's most appropriate for you. And I should tell you that the consumer edition, in this case Home Premium, is the one that is usually going to be less expensive. There are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, it doesn't have some of the technical things like security that the others do. But mostly it's because to reach a price point that home users are willing to pay, it needs to be a little less expensive. So for the Windows 7 offering, Home Premium is the least expensive, Professional is in the middle, and Ultimate is the most expensive. Prices do vary, and of course you can get volume licensing and a lot of other things. But for our purposes, just realize that we have Microsoft, we have Windows, we have 7, and then we have the different editions. That's how you understand which operating system you're using. Knowing the actual operating system you're using, though, is just a start. Frankly, we really don't care. What we care about is now how do we use it. And that's what we want to take a look at next, is what do we do with the... After the computer boots up, the desktop is displayed. This is a GUI, G-U-I, or Graphical User Interface, and it provides us a nice, easily understandable way to see what the operating system and hardware can provide, as well as letting us interact with it. Now, if you believe in science fiction movies, it's kind of like when they say aliens take on a human-like life form and speak a language that we can understand in order for us to relate to them. Well, this is the same kind of thing. Trust me, we don't want to see a bunch of computer language scrolling and text across our screen, nor do we want to have to type in all of those commands that the computer would normally understand. So the GUI instead shows it to us in a nice desktop configuration, with little pictures or icons that we can click on and things that we can work with a lot easier than the actual computer operating system and language itself. In Windows, what we get to see is called the desktop, and the desktop is just like the desktop you have at a regular desk. It holds important papers and files, it can have helpful tools like maybe a calculator, and it probably has a few personal items on it, maybe a family picture or maybe a clock. The same is true for the computer desktop as well. So now what we'll do is take a quick tour of the desktop and show you what all of these parts are. Now when you look at the screen, you're actually seeing the main part of the desktop, and the main part of the desktop can contain several things. It can contain resources, like shortcuts to your printers and your modems. As we've seen, our desktop actually holds one of our resources, which is this folder for our project files. That folder also includes individual files, which we've already used. The desktop can also have shortcuts to launching applications. Those are the computer programs that are going to do specific things. For example, our email. And later versions of Windows, like Windows Vista and Windows 7, also can have something called gadgets. And we'll play a little bit later with gadgets to show you how you can enable those. What I'd like to do though now, instead of focusing on the main part of the desktop, is to actually come down to the bottom of the screen and focus on this thing at the very bottom. The whole thing is actually called the taskbar, and the taskbar has a couple of different regions. In Windows XP, and even in Windows Vista, on the far right side, you're going to see something that is referred to as the system tray. This is going to have any variety of icons in it. Now, I do want to remind you very quickly that what you're currently looking at is my particular computer system, and my system is going to be different than yours. Even if you're running Windows 7 Ultimate like I am, yours is still going to be different because you have different types of hardware, different types of software, and those things. So remember that in this course, we're talking about the generalities, and everybody's going to have a system tray on the right side of their taskbar. Until you actually launch some programs, most of the middle part of the taskbar will be empty. In Windows 7 only, you may see some icons on the left-hand side. If I pause over these, mine tell me I have a Windows Media Player, I have Windows Explorer, and I also have Internet Explorer. We're going to come back and talk about these parts of the taskbar in just a moment. But we're actually going to start with the first thing on the left, which is the Start button. In Windows XP, it will actually say Start. In Windows Vista and Windows 7, it's just going to have the Windows logo. By giving it a single left click, we get to open up the Start menu. Again, what you see on the left-hand side of the Start menu is going to be very unique to your computer. But what you see on the right-hand side should be more consistent with what I'm seeing. And I'm going to start at the very top. At the top, we see a picture, and we'll talk more about how you can customize this picture for your particular account when we talk about user accounts. The first option lets me know that I am currently logged on as the administrator, and if I clicked on this option, it would open my personal folders. I then have Documents, Pictures, Music, Games, an overview of the computer and all of its drives, as well as the control panel, which is where we get to the settings for the computer, access to my devices and printers, access to what we call default programs, and even help and support. If we move back up to the top of this particular menu, Documents, Pictures, Music, and Games are folders that are all included really in every version of Windows that's recent. Yours may be called something different. For example, yours may say My Documents, My Pictures, My Music, but again, the concept is the same. What I want to start with is this button for Computer. When you roll your mouse over it, it says it allows you to see the disk drives and other hardware that are part of this computer. I might not like having to click on the Start button though and come over here and actually do a couple of clicks to get to this. So I'm going to show you a shortcut. The computer is something that we can actually put as an icon on the desktop. If I right click, I get to see a context sensitive menu for the computer option. There are several different activities that I can do with it, but there's one option in particular that I'm interested in right now. It says Show on Desktop. I'm going to do a single left click on that option, and then I'm going to press the Escape key on my keyboard to get out of the Start menu. And I want you to notice that I now have an icon or a picture for the computer on my desktop. If I double click on this, it would be exactly the same as going to the Start button and clicking on Computer. But as you can see, this is more easily accessible. Think of it in many ways as being able to keep something right on your desk instead of having to go over maybe to a file room to get to it. It's much faster and easier to access on your desktop than it is in a drawer in a different room. So it's very easy to add system icons like Computer, the Recycle Bin, even those Pictures and Documents folders by right-clicking and simply saying. But let's go back and take a look at the Start button again. We know that the right side of the Start button contains some common folders as well as some common ways to access settings through the control panel, devices and printers, and default programs. But what about the left side? Well, the left side is kind of a combination. There are some things that will always appear there, and there are some things that will kind of rotate on or off. only showing up if you recently used them. But one of the things that I notice is what I happen to be looking for isn't here. So how do I find it? Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. Let's say what I'm looking for is the calculator. The calculator is a program that comes with Windows, and I know I should have it, but I'm not seeing it. Well, even though you have recently used applications at the top of the list, you'll notice at the bottom it also says All Programs. If I pause over this, then I get to see a different type of menu, and I'm just going to move my mouse off of it and show you that once you pause over it and you click, it doesn't necessarily go back, but now the option actually turns to back. So you can see as I continue to move over this in Windows 7, it kind of moves and changes automatically. In Windows Vista and in Windows XP, you would actually need to physically left-click on this option to get it to expand out. So once I'm seeing all of my programs, it gets easier to see what I'm looking for. I can see a variety of things, and again, we're not talking specifically about software here, so we're not going to talk about all of them. But one that I wanted to point out is that every Windows computer has a folder called Accessories. In order to see what's in Accessories, I need to click on it, which I'll do now. That expands the Accessories folder and lets me see what's in it. So now way up here at the top is the folder, and all of these things indented below are inside of the Accessories folder. And what do you know? There's my calculator. So I could simply click on the calculator at this point and launch the program and use it to do some math. That's a good thing if I know where to find it, but that also can be very hard. So I want to show you one of the shortcuts that's available with Windows Vista and Windows 7. I'm going to move back down to the bottom of the menu, and I'm going to choose Back. That's going to move me back to All Programs, which is the default where I can see it. Now you'll notice just above the Office button and just below All Programs, there's a text box that says Search for Programs and Files. I've used this a couple of times already when we went to use different things in the computer, even though we hadn't quite gotten to this point yet. For example, I did a search for mouse and keyboard. Now what I'm going to do is say, I don't know where to find this calculator. I know that we have one, but I have no idea what folder it would be in. So instead, I can simply start to type calculator. You'll notice that I do not have to completely type it. This is a smart search feature. The computer goes out, and as you type each letter, it tries to narrow it down. And by the time that I get to CAL, it says, okay, I found one program that has CAL in it called Calculator. I also found some entries under the control panel, Calibrate, for example, or Clock. Calculator is what I want, and so again, I could click on this. And we've done this a couple of times when we've opened up different features for working with our keyboard and our mouse. But here's what I want to do. I actually want to be able to get to the calculator quicker and faster. So I'm going to pin this to the Start menu so I can find it when I want it. If I right-click on the calculator option, one of the options I have is something that says Pin it to the Start menu. I will left-click Pin to Start menu, and now I'm going to press my Escape key to get out of this. And what I can now see is that even though I haven't opened it, the calculator will permanently stay pinned to the top of my Start menu. That way I always know where to find it. That makes it very easy. Probably one of my favorite features about Vista and Windows 7 is the addition of this ability to search by simply clicking on the Start button and typing in the name of a folder, a file, or a program. Since your computer can literally hold thousands and thousands of files, this makes finding what you look for relatively easy and a lot faster than having to search through all of those folders on their own. Let's get back to this taskbar. I'm going to press my Escape key to get out of the Start button, and we'll talk a little bit about the taskbar, which is always going to be at the bottom of our screen. Remember that on the right-hand side, we have the System tray. The System tray will have any variety of little icons in it that show you what programs are running. In my case, if I pause over these, I can see a couple of things. I can see a little flag with an X that's telling me I have some PC issues, one important message and 2 messages total. To the right of that, I can pause over it, and this is telling me that I'm currently connected to a network and I have internet access. This icon will look different in both Windows XP and Windows Vista. For those 2 operating systems, you'll actually see 2 little overlapping computer monitors. If you have an internet connection, on the bottom right of those two monitors, you'll see a little globe. And if you pause over it, it will either say local only if you're on a network without internet, or it will say local and internet if you have both. Then I see a little speaker, and it tells me that right now my speaker is available and the volume's at 100%. In the next lesson, we'll talk about how to actually adjust some of these things. But know that the system tray shows you different things that are running in the background while your computer is on, and it also gives you useful information about their current status. When we talk about software, we'll talk a little bit more about the buttons that I'm seeing on the left. And for Windows Vista and Windows XP, remember that you won't see any of the buttons here until you actually launch a program. Windows Vista and XP, though, does have an area similar to this on the left-hand side called the Quick Launch Bar. It also holds quick shortcuts like we put for my computer, except it puts them on the taskbar instead of the desktop. The one last thing we should talk about when we're talking about the desktop itself is the fact that the taskbar can be modified. If I press and hold my left mouse button on any blank space of the taskbar, and I drag my mouse all the way up to the top of the screen, I can actually move my taskbar to any edge, the top, the left, the right, or the bottom. Now, I really don't recommend this because the default is for it to be at the bottom, and any of the books and references and people that you talk to are going to assume that's where it's at. But just know that you can move it by pressing and holding on a blank space and then dragging it to an edge. What's more common and maybe more important to know is that if you put your mouse on the very top border, you'll see that your mouse turns from a white arrow to a double-headed arrow. When you have the double-headed arrow, that means that you can resize the taskbar. If I press and hold my left mouse button and drag up, I can make the taskbar much bigger. Now, since there's nothing open on it really at the moment, this would be unnecessary and it's just wasting space. But here's why I wanted to show it to you. Sometimes people accidentally drag it all the way down. And in Windows XP and Windows Vista, if you drag it all the way down, you can actually squish it flat so that you can't see it anymore. Don't panic. What you need to know is that for Vista and XP, you have to have a taskbar, and it has to be on the left, right, top, or bottom. So if you can't see it, try going to the bottom of your screen and moving all the way down with the cursor and see if it turns into a double-headed arrow. You'll probably only be able to see the top of the arrow. If you can see that, then you can press and hold your left mouse button and simply drag it up to the regular size. I can't do that on Windows 7 because in Windows 7 I'm actually unable to squish it down. They kind of fixed that because they knew it was a problem for prior operating systems. Other than moving and sizing it, we also can set properties. If I right-click on the taskbar and I choose Properties, there are only a couple of things that I want to show you. First of all, there's a checkbox that says you can lock the taskbar. That way you can't accidentally resize it or move it. Another option is to auto-hide the taskbar. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on so you can see what that does. Then I'm going to move to the bottom of this window, and you'll see that I have an OK, a Cancel, and an Apply button. Many times when you're asked to make settings or changes for things like printing or how Windows works, you will see these three buttons. OK tells it to save your settings and to close the window. Cancel says to close the window without saving any of the changes. And Apply lets you to apply the new settings but keeping the window open. That way, if you need to change a setting because you're not sure if you did the right one or not, you don't have to go through the process of opening the window all over again. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a single left click on Apply, and I want you to watch the taskbar at the bottom of the screen. See how it slides out of the way? This is the Auto Hide feature. It gets it out of the way, kind of takes it off the screen, and if I want it back, I simply need to move my cursor to the bottom of the screen to bring it back up. So it goes away, and it comes back. Do I like that feature? Personally, I do not. Personally, I turn this feature off, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it off for the rest of this course, just so we don't lose track of where that taskbar is. But I did want you to know that some people like to keep their desktop kind of cleaned up. And for that, auto-hiding the taskbar does give you a little bit of extra space. I'll move back up to the auto-hide option. I'll click on the checkbox to remove it. And I'm not going to talk about the rest of these features for this class because this is computer fundamentals. We get into a lot more of these specific options in the Windows 7 course. So for now, I'll just say OK. You'll notice that my taskbar now comes up and it's not hidden anymore because I turned that feature off. And now you've had a good tour of the desktop, understanding that the desktop can contain all kinds of little icons for everything from system things like the computer to individual files and folders. You know that the taskbar is usually found at the bottom, and it includes the system tray, could include a quick launch bar, but always includes a start button. You also know that you can customize the taskbar, including moving it, sizing it, and setting properties. Because the Windows desktop is actually the virtual version of what should be your own personal desktop, we want to make sure that you know how to make it yours. In other words, how to personalize it. So let's take just a few minutes to take a look at just some of the ways that you can personalize Windows. I'm going to start by moving down to the old system tray. Now remember that this is going to be different on Windows 7 than it is on Windows Vista or XP. One of that's different is how I customize it. So in Windows 7, if I want to see my clock, I'm going to click this little up arrow, and then I'm going to click the Customize link. This allows me to customize the system tray, which is something that you can't really do a lot of in the prior versions of Windows. But one of the links that I have here is the one to turn system icons on or off. And when I click that link, you'll see at the very top that currently my clock is turned off. Now I like to be honest with you. When we're recording videos like the one that you're seeing, it takes us a lot longer to actually shoot the videos than the final edited product that you see. So, in most CBT trainings, the clocks are turned off, simply so you don't see the jumps back and forth in time. For this demonstration, though, I need to turn the clock on. So I'm going to click the drop down, turn it on, come to the bottom, and click OK. If you're using Vista, right-click and select Properties. Then you can turn on the clock using a checkbox on the Notifications tab. For Windows XP, again you'd right-click and choose Properties, but then there's going to be a Show the Clock checkbox on the Taskbar tab. That brings me back to the original screen, and I'll say OK once again to close this out. Now this should be where all of the XP and Vista people already were, except in Windows 7 you not only get to see the time, but you also get to see the date. I think that's a great feature. In XP and Vista, if you want to see the date, you can pause over it and that will actually show you the date. But in Windows 7, it shows both of them without having to move over it. The reason I brought this up is because I wanted to show you how to adjust your time. I'm going to move down over the clock and I'm going to give it a single left click. This gives you a calendar and it also gives you a clock that you can look at. If I want to change the settings, I can click the link that says Change Date and Time Settings. Changing the clock settings works the same way on Vista, but if you're using Windows XP, you'll need to right-click the clock, choose Adjust Date and Time, and make the adjustments on either the Date and Time or the Time Zones tabs. The first thing you need to do is look at your date and time and make sure it's correct. If it's not, you can click the button that says Change Date and Time. When you do so, it will bring up another box that allows you to simply click on the calendar to designate the appropriate date and time, as well as clicking in the clock and using the up and down arrows or typing a new number to change your time. That's all there is to setting this particular feature. Then you can say OK. If you need to change your time zone, you click the Change Time Zone button and you select the appropriate time zone from the drop-down. Now every time zone in the world is listed here, so hopefully you don't get lost in the list. As you move up, it actually is moving west. So by that I mean, if we currently had it set for Eastern and I wanted to go to Pacific, I have to go up in the list to find things like Mountain and the Pacific time zone, as well as Arizona. It's kind of interesting to look through the list, but what's most important is that you select your time zone. That way, any files that you create, any emails that you send, will be properly time-stamped. You will also notice that there's a checkbox that asks if you want to automatically adjust for daylight savings time. If you live in an area that recognizes daylight savings time, I recommend this. That way, when you wake up anytime after 12:01 on the Sunday it changes, your computer will have already updated and it's one less clock you have to change in your house. Once that's set, you again can say OK. When all of those are set up correctly, you say OK again, and then your time and date should be appropriately set. Knowing the correct time and date is very important, especially for me, because I can start working at any time of the day or night, and if I'm not careful, I completely lose track of what time it actually is. But it's not exactly the most fun thing we can do, and now I want to show you a couple of fun things. Primarily, how do I change the picture on my desktop, otherwise known as the wallpaper in prior versions, and also how do I change my screensaver and what is a screensaver. So let's have you right-click on any blank part of your desktop and choose Personalize. This window again will look different if you're on XP or Vista, but it basically should have the same options available to you somewhere. I want to go all the way to the bottom in Windows 7 and to do a single click where it says Desktop Background. In Windows 7, they call it the desktop background. In prior versions, they called it a wallpaper. These are the same things. What you will find, though, is that in the last couple versions of Windows, they have gotten very, very elegant with what you can use as a wallpaper or a background. You actually can have full color pictures. To change this, you need to somehow find a new picture. One option is to use the drop-down where it says Picture Location and to choose some of the options that Windows has built in. For example, I can just choose Windows Desktop Backgrounds, and then I can scroll through the list. They have categories of architecture, different characters, we can do landscapes, we can find pictures of nature, some scenes, pictures of the United States, and so forth. So for now, I'm just going to pick one that I like, maybe this one of an arch in the desert. And you can notice in the background that that has been selected. That's all there is to it. I click on Save Changes, and that's going to take me back to my original window. Now before we actually take a look at that, I want you to also change your screensaver. In Windows 7, I can click on the screensaver entry, or in Vista, I can go to that search and type in screensaver, or I can go to Control Panel, like in Windows XP, and double-click the screensaver option. I'll go ahead and give that a click. The purpose of a screensaver is actually somewhat outdated. With old monitors, if you left something on the screen for an extended period of time, it would create something called screen burn, where you actually saw a ghosted image of whatever was left up there for the life of the computer. It basically ruined your monitor. That hasn't been true for several years. Current monitors actually let the little pixels in the monitor adjust so that you don't get screen burn. But the fact is, people just like having screensavers. So we'll show you how to go ahead and set one up. A screensaver is something that comes up on your monitor after your monitor or your computer sit unused for a certain amount of time. And it has some kind of a pattern or thing that's going to happen that changes the screen in the old days so it didn't get screen burn. Today, it's just because it's kind of fun. So let's see how we can work with these settings. Regardless of your Windows version, how you set up a screensaver is exactly the same, even though the exact options may be a little bit different. You're going to start by using the drop-down where it says Screensaver. Currently mine says None. You can choose from text, blank, bubbles, something called Mystify. You can do a photo slideshow. You can do something called Ribbons. And as I said, you may have different options with older operating systems like Pipes or Star Fields. I'm going to choose Ribbons. What I can now see is a sample of what this will do on my screen. Every screensaver has settings that you can use, so I'm going to click on that. And there are no options for this particular one, so I'll say OK. If you would have chosen 3D text and open Settings, there you would have been able to type in the text that you actually want to see. For example, I could put Aaron's computer and have that text scroll around on the screen as my screensaver. If you ever want to see how the screensaver is going to look, you can press or click the preview button and then don't touch your mouse. This is going to bring up the screensaver actually full screen. Once you're done looking at it, just wiggle your mouse and it will bring you back to the dialog box that you are using. After you choose the actual screensaver, then you should choose how long you want the computer to wait before the screensaver comes on. 1 minute is ridiculously short because it can be irritating if you turn around to pick up a pencil and by the time you turn back around, your screensavers come up. I recommend something like 15 or maybe even 30 minutes. I'll go ahead and just click on the up arrow and set mine for 15 minutes. If, for security purposes, your screensaver comes up, and instead of just being able to wiggle the mouse, you want to have to log back onto the computer, you can check the box that says on resume, display the logon screen. That way, if you get called away from your desk at work and your screensaver comes up, somebody can't simply walk by your computer, move your mouse, and see the files that you're working on. Once you get these set the way that you want, you can simply click OK. And then you can get out of the box you're in by clicking on the red X in my case. And at this point, we can see my beautiful wallpaper or desktop background that has changed. And I also know that if I don't touch my computer for 15 minutes, my screensaver will come up. These are simply ways of making the computer feel like your own. Both the desktop wallpaper and the screensaver are things that really have nothing to do with the functionality of the computer. They really are just things to make you feel a little bit more like